And this is deeply embedded in the way that Westerners think, because I think in a way because of narratives like the Odyssey, where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Narratives in particular like the biblical narrative, where you have an absolute original beginning, you have a redemptive middle, and then, you know, a final and glorious end. And this mode of thinking has affected historians for years. Foucault does his best to, as it were, try to bracket or to stop those assumptions from interfering with the way he wants to write history. Or I should say, the way he wants to construct his genealogies. Okay, now, here's the claim, I think, that is the most outrageous of Foucault's, and about which a lot of the debate that you hear today about deconstruction, even though Foucault is not a deconstruction person, a lot of the debate you hear today about the universities hinges on this important claim by Foucault, and I'll start with it, and I will defend it. And then I'll give you an example of a powerful work in which he makes use of this claim. The claim is as follows. Knowledge is controlled in every society through mechanisms of power. Anywhere you find knowledge, there also you will find power. They're linked. They are conditions for the possibility of one another. Knowledge is a regime of powers, the way he sometimes says it. Today, in using the distinction I've used in these lectures, I might want to replace the word knowledge with information. And it wouldn't hurt Foucault's argument if I did, given that I think that's what the university systems and other systems produce. That's a better term now for it. But in any case, the idea here is that it cuts deeply against a lot of our humanistic sentiments. We would like to believe, based on the long Platonic tradition, that knowledge is what can be accepted by all rational beings. And the standard model for that in philosophy is mathematics. You know, 1 + 1 is 2, and you don't vote on it, and it doesn't matter what you think. And you know, that's probably right about 1 + 1 is 2. But it's a far different matter about whether it's right about the structure within which we learn systems like mathematics. And that's what Foucault is concerned with, or whole genealogical slices of time within which we learn certain practices and how to obey them. Now, when I have my students argue with me about this thesis that where you find knowledge or information, there you also find power, if they keep arguing with me, I threaten to give them a C, and then they agree with me. And that is what I call a demonstration by direction. Or a West Texas phrase for it would be hitting a mule upside the head to get his attention. That will get a student's attention when they realize that your power is connected to your knowledge and vice versa. By the way, if they happen to be the son or daughter of a $3 or $4 million donor to Duke, then their power is connected to how their knowledge may have to be treated by someone. Although I generally ignored that kind of thing. In fact, I always ignored it. All right, now that's the thesis that's considered, as hard as it may be to believe, because I think I presented it in a commonsensical way. This is the thesis that seems to have outraged a whole group of people at universities, as though this doesn't speak to the experience of, and of course it does. This is why they associate it with political correctness, because this has always spoke to the experience of those who've just entered such systems. Women, when they first came to the university, African Americans, Chicanos, and so on, have always experienced the knowledge that they were to receive as a form of power. And this certainly was true of the working class kids that entered the university system in the 60s. You know, as I said, thanks to a lot of student loans that Lyndon Johnson was responsible for, which I'll give him credit for, since his friend John Connolly recently kicked off. In any case, this has seemed to me to be obvious, but it's caused a furor a real ruckus. It's as though someone has sort of given away the secret. I mean, I don't think there are that many people in serious, quiet conversation that don't recognize this relationship. But it's not one that we like to talk about publicly. And that's that even a graduate student we have in physics that we take a particular dislike to, and who comes up with equations and views about Newtonian dynamics that are, say, at odds with various more contemporary views relating to chaos theory, we can call him a old-fashioned and kick him out. Or if the reverse is the case, we can say he's a kook and his work is too flighty and too bizarre and kick him out. I mean, clearly there's a relation, it seems to me, between knowledge and power. It is a mechanism that has operated, I think, in every society. The issue is whether there is any way, and this is going to be the happy issue, will be whether there's a way to uncouple knowledge and power. I'll leave that aside for a moment as I move through this thesis. Knowledge is comprised of not only institutions, and I'll be naming them later, of institutional rules and so on, but of discourses. And this is where we get back to Habermas in relating to communication. Knowledge or information is comprised of discourses, communications, that function through rules of exclusion, not inclusion, through rules of exclusion. In other words, institutional communications function through rules that determine who may speak, about what they may speak, for how long they may speak, in what setting they may speak, and so on. And again, this is not an invidious thing. All societies have had these. You may notice, if you watch the Congress, that there are rules for how long people may speak. There are rules for who may speak. If you're a freshman member, it's not advisable to try to hog a lot of the clock. This is not an advisable thing to do. And I don't want to make it appear as invidious in every case. But also we need to see these rules of exclusion as leaving out of what some sort of liberal theorists like Richard Rorty call, and I mean, I can't believe that they ever called it this. Richard Rorty once described philosophy as the conversation of mankind, borrowing a phrase from Michael Oakeshott. Well, that's very nice, except certain people didn't get to talk in the history of Western civilization. They were excluded from the conversation. The deviant were excluded. And I'm naming some now that have been studied by Foucault. Deviants, criminals, the mad, and of course the more normal exclusions. Up until very recently, women, the young, the old, the infirm, so on, excluded in a certain way from this conversation. And I'm not afraid to say, along with Marx, that we really don't notice many working class or lower class people in the early great literature of the West. In all the works of Homer, only one common foot soldier appears, and he has one line. Basically, he says to Nestor, the wise old general, the plan, basically sucks, and then he walks out of the book, and that's it. Of course, it does, and so it's kind of a little joke. I think Homer was aware that certain people weren't getting to talk. So when we talk about Athenian democracy, we need to remember that just like early American democracy, it excluded a lot of people. In fact, according to Foucault, the exclusions were a condition for the possibility of that being a form of knowledge and discourse. In other words, it wasn't, as it were, by accident that these groups were picked out. They were picked out because their marginal discourses would allow the main discourse to be even more in place, in control, and so on. And this seems to me, at least, to cut very strongly against Habermas's communication theory. Because if it is the case that wherever we find information, communication, and so on, We also will find power that controls the ways in which it flows, who may talk when and how long. If there's no way to uncouple that, then Habermas's argument will fail. Foucault does not say it will fail. In fact, Foucault himself, because he holds a radical anarchist position, is caught in what I would call the critic's paradox. The more powerfully the critic paints the ills of the society and the fragility of the self and the struggle it undergoes to be a human, the more powerful our account is, the more hopeless the people feel who could do anything about it.